Welcome back to the Fantasy Price Check. Today we're going to be talking about Hollywood Brown. Just to let you know what we're doing here on the channel. We are taking a look at player ADPs and we are grading them based upon whether a player is overpriced, underpriced, or fairly priced. And today we're getting into Hollywood Brown. We're going to be doing these price checks all season long leading up to draft. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing to this channel, you will hashtag win the draft. Let's get into Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown is currently being drafted in the middle of the 6th round as a wide receiver 30 off the board. He's currently being drafted after A.J. Green and Jarvis Landry and ahead of Tyler Boyd and Michael Gallup. Hollywood Brown is one of my favorite breakout candidates, and in this video, we're going to get into why. Last year as a rookie, he had a couple good games and scored a bunch of touchdowns, but you were not getting consistent receiving production from him. Last year, Hollywood had 71 targets for 46 receptions, 584 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He had 5 good games during the regular season where he would have helped your fantasy team, but the rest of the games were complete busts. His best game came against the Dolphins in week 1, and then everyone rushed out to the waiver wire to pick him up. In that game, he had 147 receiving yards and scored 2 touchdowns, and then in week 2, he followed that up with 8 receptions for 86 yards against the Cardinals, but then he went quiet. Between weeks 2 and 12, he only had 1 game with more than 9 fantasy points, and he also missed week 6 and week 7 with an injury. In week 10 against the Bengals, he put up 80 yards and a touchdown, and then in week 12, he put up 2 touchdowns against the Rams. But that's all you got from Hollywood last year, and the problem is that you didn't know when to start him. He was either boom or bust. It was good to see him have a big game in the playoffs. He had 7 receptions for 126 yards against the Titans. You have to keep in mind that Hollywood Brown was hobbled by a foot injury last year and was never 100%. In his last year at college, Hollywood Brown suffered a lisfranc foot injury in the Big 12 championship, and it continued to bother him last year. Last year, he had to play with a screw in his foot, which he just had removed this past offseason. I think you're going to see a big jump in his receiving numbers now that he's fully recovered from this foot injury. Hollywood Brown put up nearly 600 yards and 7 touchdowns in just 14 games as a rookie. Imagine what he's going to be able to do with Lamar Jackson year 2 when he's completely healthy. Last year, Hollywood Brown only played 59% of the team's offensive snaps, and that's surely going to increase this year now that he's healthy. And when Hollywood Brown was on the field, he was commanding a solid 19% target share, which I think that you're going to also see increase to the low 20s. Another thing to consider is that Hollywood Brown is the first wide receiver taken in the 2019 NFL draft class. The 2019 NFL draft class is regarded as the best wide receiver draft class since the 2014 NFL draft class featuring Odell Beckham Jr. and Mike Evans. Just look at some of the other names drafted after Hollywood Brown: A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, and Terry McLaurin. Those guys are being drafted in rounds 4 and 5. You're able to get Hollywood Brown in round 6. Hollywood Brown wasn't able to run at the combine, but he has 4.3 speed, and he is more than just a burner. Hollywood Brown is a complete wide receiver. He could run every route in the route tree. He also has outstanding production in college, getting over 1,000 yards and 7+ touchdowns in back-to-back seasons at Oklahoma. His final season at Oklahoma saw a stat line of 75 receptions, 1,318 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Just to put that in perspective, in CeeDee Lamb's final season at Oklahoma, he had 62 receptions for 1,327 yards and 14 touchdowns. Very similar production. One of the most important stats when evaluating rookie wide receivers is your yards per route run. If a rookie has more than 2 yards per route run, it's usually a good indicator of future success. Hollywood Brown hit 2.25 yards per route run, which ranked 25th among wide receivers last year. Hollywood's yards per route run exceeded other rookie receivers such as DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson, and Mecole Hardman, but was lower than A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, and Terry McLaurin. Lastly, he's got an NFL bloodline to the best receiver of the past decade. Him and Antonio Brown are cousins. I'm expecting big things from Hollywood Brown in 2020. I recently watched a video of Hollywood Brown training this offseason, and I'm going to be throwing up a link to that in the info card above, so be sure to check that out at the end of this video. Hollywood Brown is putting on the work to add some muscle onto his small frame, and his routes are looking crispy. After you watch this video, you are going to be sold on Hollywood Brown, particularly his route running. This year, I'm expecting Hollywood Brown to get over 1,000 yards and score 7+ touchdowns. Hollywood Brown can finish as a top 25, borderline top 20 wide receiver. I currently have Hollywood Brown as a wide receiver 28, which is 2 spots above his ADP. He's right in that same tier as Jarvis Landry, Stephon Diggs, Tyler Boyd, and Michael Gallup. What I like about Hollywood Brown is that he offers way more touchdown upside than those guys. I'm expecting those guys to get about 5 to 7 touchdowns, whereas Hollywood Brown could score 7 to 9 touchdowns this year. And I also expect him to put up about the same number of receiving yards after he takes that year 2 leap. As a wide receiver 30 off the board, Hollywood Brown is underpriced. Hollywood Brown could be the next Tyreek Hill. Get him on your team in round 6. And if you want to get more price checks like this one, I'm going to be throwing up the price checks for A.J. Brown and Terry McLaurin, so be sure to check those out. And if you like this one, give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.